It's Bob Hoopshire, and this is the Gaining Perspective podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with some of the top thought leaders in the investment advisor profession and investment management industry. I'm the founder of Advisor Perspectives and a vice chairman of Vetify. One of the hardest parts of planning for your loved ones with disabilities is getting started. It's overwhelming. Thinking of who will care for your child when you or your partner cannot is not easy. While we realize that no one will care for your child like you do, you need to plan for the day when you no longer can. And in this session, we will talk about one tool that may help with some of the financial responsibilities for supporting your loved one while helping them stay qualified for means tested benefits, supplemental security income, and Medicaid. My guest will introduce the importance of planning ahead and maintaining eligibility for public benefits, whether the family is wealthy or has limited means. Jeff Vistica is the founder and principal of Vistica Wealth Advisors, a California based registered investment advisor. So, Jeff, tell me about your career path, what led you to found Vistica, and also where your interest developed in helping families with children that have disabilities.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bob. So, we're based in Carlsbad, California, Vistica Wealth Advisors. I've been in the financial planning field, since about 2000. I started off at the big insurance outfits. Back then, it was called IDS Life Insurance Company, which became American Express, which now I believe is called Ameriprise. I dabbled a little bit with one of the large mutual life insurance companies. I guess realized real quickly on, if I was going to be in a position to do the right thing for our clients and really look out for folks in the right capacity, it wasn't going to be dishing off products, if you will, from a large outfit. The appeal to give good advice, back then, obviously, just getting your feet wet, you're learning the ropes, your learning curve is as steep as ever. To this day, our learning curve is as steep as ever. There's always new things to learn. So my path was to develop something that was going to put our clients on the right side, do the right thing for clients, and hence Vistica Wealth Advisors was formed roughly in 2005. And I guess you could say the rest is history.
Tell me about ABLE accounts. I know that's going to be a focus of what you're going to discuss today. What is an ABLE account?
If you're familiar with the rules around supplemental security income and Medicaid, Bob, folks with disabilities are very, very unfairly limited to what they can have in terms of income and assets. So an ABLE account is one way for them to save beyond these incredibly low thresholds. The threshold currently, some states vary. In California, part of the asset limit has gone up. It's going away next year. But for the most part across the country, the asset limit is at $2,000 per month. Okay, so if somebody has excess resources beyond those $2,000, they need to spend that down on a routine basis each month. It's simply unfair. Okay, my to go back to your question about why the special needs focus. My family has special needs. I had a special needs sibling. My son has some special needs. So it's something that's very near and dear to me. There's so much complexity in the planning for special needs, planning for disabilities world. There's no true simple resource for a family to go to get answers, and that really bothered me. I wanted to be informed for our own family. I wanted to be in a position with my background in finance and financial planning to be able to help more people. Not to say that I don't enjoy helping families without disabilities, or children with disabilities. There's just something very special when you bring that equation into the mix.
Well, I have several coworkers and former coworkers who have family members who have disabilities. So I've also taken a special interest in trying to educate the public about the various ways that families can plan for their financial needs. Who can set up and manage an ABLE account?
Most recently, well, with the we all familiar at this point with Secure Act 2.0. Okay, the age of a disability onset prior to Secure Act 2.0 needed to be before age 26. Okay, starting in 2026, the age is going to go up to age 46. Okay, but for now, we're dealing with the onset being at that 26 age mark. A disability, for sakes of qualifying to be eligible, can be one of three different ways. Really, it's a physical disability, okay, cognitive disability, or even a mental health challenge. Okay, so one area that comes up pretty routinely is, sometimes folks who are autistic um, get a later in life diagnosis, right? So sometimes that's beyond the age 26. Well, we all know, if you're familiar with autism isn't something that we develop over time. Autism is something that we're born with. Okay. So a lot of times, if folks want to set up an ABLE account and the diagnosis for the child, or adult child for that matter, happened after 26, there's a case and argument to be made to go to the providers that make these ABLE accounts available to be able to set it up.
So, how does one go about setting up an ABLE account?
Yeah, how do you go about setting up? It's not as simple as calling up your financial planner, going to the neighborhood bank, etc. It doesn't quite work that way, as we're also familiar with, but it is still very simple. You go, you set these things up online. Okay, um, not all states have adopted the programs just yet. They're very similar in fashion to the 529 college savings plans. In fact, they fall under the same code. They're 529-A is what they fall under. So you can go to any online program. If let's just say, for example, um, you're a resident of a state who does not provide an ABLE account, you can go to an open ABLE account, set up the account there, fund it. You're able to fund it up to the annual exclusion amount. So that for 2023, that's 17,000. Okay, if you have if the person with the disability does have earned income in addition to the annual exclusion amount, they can put in some of their own earned income, which is roughly for this year around 13,500 in round numbers. Okay, so so the person with the disability can set up the account. Okay, the guardian for a minor with a disability can set up the account, or a court appointed legal guardian can also set up the account.
And can someone have multiple ABLE accounts? So, could a grandparent set one up?
That's a great question. The beneficiary, who's also the account owner, in all instances, no matter who sets it up, there can only be one ABLE account. Okay, so to bring up a separate topic, if you're familiar with special needs trusts, somebody can have multiple special needs trusts, but you can only have that same person can only have the one ABLE account. Okay, and that's really a state record keeping uh, preference more than anything.
So, you can set up an ABLE account anytime up to age 46 now, starting in 2016.
Age 46, the disability needs to have onset prior to age 46. That starts in 2026. Okay, For now, we're dealing with the age 26 limitation.
When can someone set it up? I assume they can set it up as soon as the disability is diagnosed.
That's right. And we typically say there's no time like the present, right? Because you even if you want to get the able account set up, it can be set up with a very nominal amount of money. There's no there's no attorney that needs to be involved to set this up. Whereas we would typically advise, obviously, if you're setting up a special needs trust, whether first party or third party, I should carefully say, but absolutely, you want to be consulting with a qualified attorney to look into that, qualified advisory team, et cetera. But yes, as soon as you have a diagnosis that makes you eligible, you can absolutely go ahead and set up an ABLE account.
So we spoke about one limitation, which is that you can only have one ABLE account for a beneficiary. What other limitations are there to ABLE accounts?
The limitations really come from how much you can put into the account. Okay, so as planners, if we're dealing with a family that might be of more substantial needs, putting in $17,000 a year is the current limitation, plus that extra 13,000 that I mentioned if there's earned income, doesn't move the needle too much for wealthier families, right? Not to say that these aren't valuable for folks all across the wealth spectrum, if you will, but that is a notable limitation there. The accounts themselves, similarly to a 529 college savings plan, 529 college savings plan can be used for higher education expenses or primary schools, et cetera, education related expenses. For ABLE accounts, same kind of concept applies. They can only be used for what are deemed qualified disability expenses, which is basically anything the child needs to live on at the end of the day. So food, getting around, that sort of thing, housing, even many different things, right? You can't use it. They're not intended to be used to take fancy trips around the world, sort of thing. Gambling, if somebody's a gambler, those sort of things aren't allowed, right? But it's virtually most anything that's living related. You're supposed to keep track of what's being spent. Okay, so the way the functionality of these works is that you set up an ABLE account with a state-sponsored program. Okay, you simultaneously open up a bank account, checking account at any local bank. The functionality comes out of the checking account, the banking account, but the back end state-sponsored program, think of them as kind of like the record keeper. Okay, so that's the functionality of the program. In addition to that, a lot of programs too, Bob, have made prepaid debit Visa cards available. So rather than having to transfer money from the ABLE program to the checking account and keep track that way, folks can front load these prepaid Visa debit cards with precisely how much they want to go spend on whatever expense it might be. And then that's an easier way to go about doing it. And I will say, when we get into planning for disabilities, there's so many different tools available, right? And the ABLE account is a fantastic tool. What I probably like most about the ABLE account is that it's liberating for a person with a disability, okay? Because all of a sudden they go from being so handcuffed, if you will, on what they can and can't spend. They're so handcuffed in what can be living within their, any type of checking account, bank account, investment account, what have you, to here they go with something that they have their own debit card, right? They can go out and use that like a, neurotypical human being. And it's a beautiful thing to see. It really, truly is.
And is there any limit on when those funds can begin to be used? Can they be used at any age?
Any age. They can be used. What a lot of states have, lucky enough, and we're obviously based here in California, with whatever balance is left over on the ABLE account upon the passing of the account owner, the account beneficiary, there's what's called a Medicaid payback provision in there. Okay, so Medicaid has the right to this asset to reimburse themselves for related healthcare costs that Medicare, made available to the beneficiary.
Medicaid.
I'm sorry, Medicaid.
Yeah.
Medicaid, correct. So that's a key consideration when we're looking at planning strategies, right? When we're looking at cash flow projections, et cetera. As financial planners, our day-to-day work with that becomes very important because we want to make sure that this ABLE account doesn't have anything more left over in it, to whatever degree we can control that. We can't control a premature passing of somebody or anything of that nature, but to be in control and knowing where the ABLE account balances at all times is a key planning consideration.
The future is fast approaching, and artificial intelligence is positioned to fundamentally change not only society, but financial advisory. Join us on August 30th for VettaFi's AI Symposium, where experts and thought leaders dig into AI and explore its potential impact. Go to etftrends.com/webcasts/artificial-intelligence-symposium.com to learn more and register for the event.
Speak more generally about the things that you see that families really need to achieve for their special needs children in terms of other types of support that go beyond the ABLE account, and how you typically work with families to make that happen.
Be prepared to have the right team in place for the family. Okay. Families that deal with disabilities are typically incredibly well informed. They're going to know right off the bat if you're the right person to take a look at this. And this is something that is not something to dabble in. Okay, the consequences of making a mistake for a family or a person with a disability that is trying to become eligible for public benefits, SSI, Medicaid, et cetera, Section 8 housing, whatever it might be, the impact of making a mistake is potentially catastrophic. Right, you potentially disqualify somebody from receiving Medicaid or SSI, et cetera. It's something that you absolutely need to have the right team around you, right? And that's a very experienced estate planning attorney who has a true focus in special needs planning, right? Oftentimes, what we'll do in addition to our skill set is bring in what we refer to as a public benefits expert, okay, to look at what the family might be eligible to receive, what they are receiving, make sure that whatever they are receiving is maintained. This is all fundamental but incredibly important things to consider in planning, right? So if we're considering planning for persons with disabilities, I think it really boils down to two fundamental points. Okay, it's how can we as parents replicate ourselves to care for our children when we're gone, right? That's number one. Who's going to look out for our kids when we're gone? Our kids with disabilities. Okay. Number two, from a financial planner's perspective, is how will those efforts be funded? Okay, is that private resources, lucky enough to have the wealth and means to do so? Is that public resources? How do we get assets titled, et cetera, to get qualified and maintain those? Is it something in between, right? So it's continuity of care is what we talk about. Okay, it's related to a business succession plan, right? You're the one that runs your business. You know how to run the business. You understand the intricacies of what keeps it afloat, keeps it profitable, et cetera, right? If you're the main person within that business, how are you going to replicate yourself when you're gone or ready to step away. Same kind of principle, right? Probably a lot more in depth on the on the disability side, but that's the premise, right? We want to create the succession plan. We want to create the succession plan and then a backup to the succession plan, right? So part of the tools, if you will, in a special needs plan or toolbox is typically looking at a special needs trust and funding a special needs trust. You want to absolutely be talking to the right team to do that, because this is a trust that might need to hold up for 40, 50 some odd years, right? Lots goes into that, okay? You want to look at having, in terms of replacing mom and dad in the caretaking process, you want to help the family identify what we call circles of support, right? So is that family members, friends, close friends, siblings, potentially, etc., that can help look at what the person with the disability needs, help articulate that, document that all in what we call a letter of care, okay? And really capture what it is this person needs to function on an ongoing basis.
Does having a trust limit at all the ability to set up and use an ABLE account?
That's a great question. There's actually a couple of quirky things about trusts and ABLE accounts and how they function, okay? So real briefly, if you understand the basic premise of a special needs trust, it's to remove control of assets from the person with the disability so that they can qualify for SSI or Medicaid. Okay, ABLE account does the same thing. So one of the rules on special needs trusts is that since the government assumes that SSI is going to provide for what's called in-kind support and maintenance, so food and shelter. So SSI, roughly, in California right now, there's a little bit of a supplement. So right now, somebody getting SSI will get a little bit under $1,100 a month. That's supposed to cover food and shelter in California. That's a little bit of a joke, right? Let's be honest. Okay, so what this means is that the special needs trust, when there's distributions made from the special needs trust that pay for food or shelter, that's a big no-no. Okay, if that happens, there's at a minimum a 1/3 reduction of that SSI amount, the supplemental security income amount. Okay, so to go back to how these two tools, special needs trust and ABLE accounts, complement each other, this is perfectly legal. It's practiced all the time. If you make a distribution from the special needs trust into the ABLE account and then turn around and use the ABLE account to pay for some of your food and shelter, perfectly okay. You preserve Medicaid, you preserve SSI benefit, etc. Why that exists, to me, makes no logical sense, but it's done all the time.
But you're still limited to the $17,000 per year distribution cap, which probably isn't going to be enough, even with the $1,100 a month to cover basic living expenses.
That's right, absolutely. And another quirky thing is that typically contributions, gifts, if you will, from family members, a family member would put money into a third-party special needs trust. Okay. A first-party special needs trust would be the person with the disability's own money, meaning they got a settlement, they had income prior to an accident, perhaps, what have you. So first party is from the disabled person, third party from mom, dad, grandma, whomever. Somebody contributing a gift into a special needs trust, intending it to be a gift, it typically doesn't count for the annual exclusion, okay? Because that would defeat the whole purpose of the special needs trust if the beneficiary with a disability had access to it, right? special needs trusts are supposed to supplement these public benefits, and they can't have the assets above 2,000, right? So what that means is that if grandma wants to make a gift to to somebody, to a person with a disability, they would typically have to file Form 709, right? The gift tax form, even if it's a $10 gift, whatever it might be. Okay, it's certainly cumbersome. So something to take into consideration. On the other hand, that same grandma making whatever amount gift, below the 17,000, of course, the annual exclusion directly to enable account does qualify for the annual exclusion. So bypass needing to file Form 709. That's a form that is very easily forgotten. And when it comes to tax time, you don't want to forget, there's nominal penalties, but penalties nonetheless. Obviously, that's beyond the scope of today's talk, but something that's easily avoided by just making the contribution to the ABLE account.
What about proceeds from life insurance? I imagine that many parents think about making their special needs children the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. What do they need to think about in that context?
Great question. Name the special needs trust. If it's intended to go to the person with a disability, you want to just keep it simple, keep it clean, and name the beneficiary. Okay, to get if there's more than one beneficiary involved, and there's other types of assets involved. Let's say there's retirement assets. Okay, if there's pre-tax retirement assets, we're all familiar, with the stretch provisions going away with IRAs. Well, there's a section in Secure Act that allows persons eligible designated beneficiaries, is what they're called, which you're all probably familiar with. If we name a beneficiary with a disability, they can use the old stretch rules. So if you're looking at life insurance in the mix or other assets, it gets very important to make sure that the right asset is going to the right child, right? The person without the disability, let's assume, is making a higher income in a higher tax bracket than the person with the disability. You're probably going to want to have the right tax treated asset going there versus the IRA going to somebody that can stretch it out and minimize the impact.
If there's one key takeaway that you'd like to leave with our audience of financial advisors about the first steps that they should take when they're planning for the financial future of a special needs child, what would that be?
I would say get help. Get help. Consult with the right trust attorneys. Consult with the right public benefit experts. If you're truly serious about getting into the space, there's some good educational programs out there through the American College, as an example. There's very good field-specific symposiums that are out there. You've got to do the work and put in the time to get educated and really understand that it's not so much and exclusively the technical knowledge when it comes to planning for disabilities. It's also the compassionate side. A lot of families will get a diagnosis of their child, whatever that diagnosis might be, and it's crushing, right? There's a grieving process that families are going to be going through, and if we as advisors aren't in tune with that, I can assure you any message that you're trying to deliver won't be heard. So you really got to understand the human side of this. Obviously, the technical and planning side of it is critical, but really being patient and meeting the families where they're at and understanding them. If I would have any words of advice. It's if you think you're a good listener to your existing clients and really take the time to get to know them and understand their issues and concerns, etc., multiply that tenfold for a family with disabilities.
Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for what you do on behalf of the special needs population. I think you're providing an exceptionally valuable service. We'll include some links in the notes that accompany this podcast where you'll be able to learn more about Jeff and his company. There'll be a link to the Vistica website, a link to the ABLE National Resource Center, and we're also going to include a link to the needs assessment form that Vistica uses. Jeff, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thanks for having me, Bob. I really appreciate it. I hope this was useful.
It certainly was. And thank you for listening to the Gaining Perspective podcast with Bob Hoopsher, today featuring Jeff Vistica of Vistica Wealth Advisors. To support our podcast, please share, subscribe, or leave a review to help make our podcast more findable for your friends and colleagues. You can subscribe to Gaining Perspective on your favorite podcast service. Thank you very much.